Welcome everyone. We are so glad that you have joined us where we are taking the month of April to focus on the topic of worship. Now, worship is one of my favorite things to talk about because it probably has had the most impact on my life. And Todd Bryant is the worship leader at Covenant. And when I came to Covenant about 10 years ago, I had no clue what worship was. I had spent years and years singing, but didn't realize there was a difference between singing and worshiping. So thank you for joining us, Todd.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So give us just a little snippet into your life of how you became a worship leader.
I became a worship leader. It wasn't super spiritual. It was more out of a necessity. It was when I was 19 years old. I had been leading some music with the music pastor that was there, and he was kind of shepherding me, and then he moved away, and so they just asked me to step in as an interim and stay, but I actually stayed 28 years at that church, so it turned into a long time, and I definitely grew and learned a lot during that time, but I started very young, so about 37 years ago.
Wow. So how long have you been at Covenant?
Covenant, 12 years this coming Easter, just in a week or so, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, you weren't there very long before I got there then.
No, not too long at all.
Okay. So what I have done and asked Todd if he would do is answer some just random questions that I had asked my Bible study girls. I'm like, hey, we're doing a worship interview. What are your questions about worship? And so they gave a variety of topics.
All right.
So here's the first one, but this could be a vast answer. But what is worship?
Worship. When I think about that, I would say worship it's so different now than what it used to be to me, but I would say currently it's an honoring of with just an extravagant love, because we've been given such an extravagant love. It's just our response back to what he has done and what he's done in our life, and so I would say it's an honoring with an extravagant love, just almost an obsession with the Father and just being in His presence and loving to be with Him. And I would say there's an element too of just submission in worship, because where does He come in your priorities? Everybody worships something. Everybody worships something. Whatever is your number one priority, that is really what you're worshiping.
Wow.
It might be a job, it might be kids, and we get things out of order. But our loyalty, our devotion, He should be our priority number one. And so that's a life of worship to me, is making Him a complete surrender to Him as best I can. So.
I love that, the obsession.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started coming to choir practice, and you would stop about halfway through choir and you would just teach us. And I remember sitting there and just crying. You probably thought something was wrong with me. This girl cries all the time. But I was slowly beginning to see the difference of singing about God to singing to God.
Oh, yes.
And you're right. It was where once you fall in love with Him, it just changes so much.
It just becomes who you are, the driving force of what you do, and really in everything that you do. Worship does. So.
Yeah, I love that. So another question: how does worship look to you now versus what it looked like 10 years ago?
Okay. I would say definitely 10 years ago, worship was a style of music. It was a song. It was, and a lot of people still do that. A lot of people still associate worship. When they think of worship, they immediately think of a genre of music that's now called worship music.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
So often people confuse that, and worship is so much more than music, but music is definitely a tool. It's absolutely a tool to help and aid us in worship. I use it all the time in personal times, and of course we use it corporately. But I would say the difference between, how many years ago did you say? About 10? About 10, okay. I would say coming to worship at Covenant about that time, I was definitely about the song. I was about the perfection of the song. Now it's a deep longing. Worship is just this deep longing to be with the Father. Again, that obsession, that longing to be with Him, to spend time with Him. And that's so much more than music. And so at one time it was music, but I would say now there's just a deep longing to be in His presence and to spend quality time with Him.
That's so good. And actually leads into one of the other questions I saw on here. I heard the phrase worship is a lifestyle. Would you agree with that, and why?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we don't compartmentalize our life, or we shouldn't.
Yeah.
And often throughout my life I did. I had things that I thought were spiritual and things that I thought were secular. And so there were parts of my life that I reserved for God, and then there were parts like my job or certain entertainment or certain music I would listen to that I thought was off limits, and so I would separate these things. But worship, again, it's that priority of God being in everything that you do in life. So definitely it's a lifestyle where everything that you do can be done unto the Father, and nothing should really be segregated or separated off from our worship to Him. Everything is unto Him. So your work, your relationships, whatever you do, it should be a lifestyle of worship. And even the word says that's our reasonable service. Just for what He's done. It's just only reasonable that we would respond back by giving our whole lives to Him. So
that's what gratefulness does.
Absolutely.
It just produces so much in your life.
It does.
Can you remember a moment in your life when your worship became deeper, and why?
Definitely. I'll try to get through this without getting emotional. I'll do my best. But in 2011, I guess I kind of lived in this bubble thinking that bad things didn't happen to good people early on in my life. You know, you kind of, a lot of Christians think that way, that life's going to be all just marvelous. But in 2011, my wife was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And so that was an absolute pivotal moment for me, going through that with her and all that she dealt with after that. And I would say that was a time where before worship was not as deep. You have to really dig deep. When something like that hits in your life, you have to really dig deep and say, okay, Father, in the good times, I'm going to worship you. In the bad times, I'm going to worship you. I've got a made up mind. And you have to dig deep. And I have to say it was a challenge for me. But as I've heard Pastor Mike say before, in a time of tragedy, is this tragedy going to change anything between us, between you and the Father? And so I had to absolutely go deeper with the Lord and say, you know, that I'm going to worship you no matter what. If it's good, if it's bad, because of who He is. He deserves our worship and our praise. And like many have said, if He never does anything else for us, He's done so much, and just because of who He is, He deserves our adoration.
That is so true. That is so good. And I can tell from just being on the worship team that we could sense the depth that started happening in you. And so many of our songs too transition to promises of what we were believing God for, and our identity, what He calls us, no matter what's going on in the natural realm. So I loved that. So before you lead a worship service, how do you prepare your heart? And can the audience come with prepared heart? What does that look like?
Definitely, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it musically, but there has to be so much preparation that goes into it spiritually. You just can't walk into a corporate service and lead it. So definitely I would say personal worship is such a key to the corporate experience. And I have worship during the week, times of prayer, certainly Bible reading, but I have times when I do put on music and I just walk around the house and with hands uplifted and worship the Father, and that prepares me. And I can always tell when I go into a corporate worship service, if I have not done that, it is so different for me. It seems to be a struggle. It's just a challenge. And so I would say to anybody, if you want your corporate worship sessions to be enhanced, you need to have personal and private worship times with the Lord, because it's just preparation for that corporate time. And not only spiritually do I prepare myself physically and emotionally and mentally. Saturday is kind of a day where I'm careful about what I talk about or what I see, or I'm kind of getting myself ready for that experience on Sunday. If someone has a problem that they want to talk about, I ask if we can put it off till next week, because I don't want anything to distract me from getting my mind set for Sunday and for leading that worship experience. So I would say to anybody, just really begin to get your mind ready for worship, prepare during the week. Just definitely prepare the day before you're going to have an encounter with the Lord corporately. I get a good night's sleep. Sleep is important to me the night before. I have very erratic sleep during the week. I stay up late, and I have all different hours. But Saturday night is very important to me, to go to sleep early and just to be prepared for that corporate worship experience. So those are some of the things that I would say.
That's very helpful. And practical things when you think, I love that.
I would definitely say.
Okay, we're going to get a little bit harder. Are you ready? Okay. Why is there sometimes controversy over the use of music in church?
The use of music, or whether to have music or not, or the style of music?
I don't know. I would say more the style.
The style. Yeah, I definitely, because there's been so much controversy.
Yeah.
I think most churches, all but one denomination I can think of, has music in their church. So probably that question was meant to be more about style. Style has been something that's been going on for decades and decades. And I think we're all guilty of liking what we like.
Yes, true.
We're all very guilty of liking what we like. So you may like country music and I may like jazz, or the other person may like R&B or rock music or whatever. And we bring those tastes with us when we come to church. And music is very something easy to quickly judge. You can quickly become, a judge like on American Idol and say, I like that or I don't like that.
Yeah.
And so often we start bringing our personal preferences into, and the styles. I remember back in, in the 80s and 90s, there was something called worship wars. I don't know if you heard of that. It's a terrible thing to put the word worship and war in talking about the worship of the Lord. But it was the worship wars were what music pastors were reading about between the traditional piano and organ and the hymns versus bringing in guitars and drums and contemporary music. And there was just a real conflict in a lot of churches over that. We've certainly gotten past that season because most churches, even churches that were traditionally doing just a traditional service, now have contemporary services and are bringing in other instruments. So some of that is past, but I still think we suffer from thinking that God likes our style of music the best. God likes what I like the best, and we associate that. But it's certainly not about preference. I think it's about purity. The worship is about purity, the state of the heart, the state of the mind, the motive behind the worship, whatever the style may be. And I can think, I'll say this, I remember going to Mexico about a decade ago, and I think we get caught in our little subculture that we live in, and we think that's the whole existence of God's. Yes, we kind of get caught up in that little globe that we live in that little area. But I was in Mexico, and we were doing a crusade down there, and that night before, we got up with our contemporary worship band to lead worship in this downtown location, outdoors. A mariachi band got up before us. And usually we hear that music in a Mexican restaurant or something, but they were in their velvet suits. They were in their velvet hats, they had their accordion, they had their little instruments, and they were playing this fast, upbeat music. And what amazed me is the people in the audience had their hands uplifted and were worshiping. And that just really opened my eyes up that no matter what is offered to the Lord, if it's with a pure heart and sincerity, it can bring people into worship. So we've got to expand beyond just our little culture that we live in, we stay in all the time. And I'll say this and then I'll stop.
Such a good topic.
But I've been changing channels before, and you might be on, the religious channels might all be together on your cable provider.
Yeah.
And one, you've got a little country church with a couple people singing. It might not be the most pleasant thing you've ever heard. It could be a little bit rough to a music director's ear. And they're singing and worshiping, and then you go to the next channel, and it might be a cathedral with high church music. Change the next channel, and it might be piano and organ. Change the next channel, it might be a Pentecostal church with singing Southern gospel music or something. And I remember one day changing those channels and thinking, all of those people are sending that worship up to the same Jehovah God.
Wow, that's really good.
And I think it's not that God says, oh, this style I like and this style I don't. It's the heart behind it.
That's so good.
It's the heart behind it. And
Yeah.
it's the purity and how it's being sent up. So I don't think it matters if it's mariachi, if it's classical, if it's contemporary, whatever.
Yeah.
It's the heart, it's the purity behind it.
That is so true. I remember one time you told the worship team, do you think we could offer God a sound that is better than what he hears in heaven?
Absolutely.
It's like one of those dawning moments, like, oh,
Right.
yes.
He has the best all around him.
Yes.
So we've got to, I want to impress him with something more than just the sound.
Right.
It's got to be my heart.
The heart.
It's got to be the heart behind the worship.
Yeah.
So.
And so many times, too, we can go into church and, like you say, judge the song and make it about what we like versus, okay, I'm singing to him. This isn't about me.
Right.
Let's just take the focus.
So when we come in and we hear a song that we don't like, have a made up mind. I'm going to worship you, Father, because you're deserving of praise. It doesn't matter if you're singing my favorite or not. If it's contemporary or traditional, whatever, I'm going to worship you.
Yeah.
No matter what they present.
That is so good to have that mindset. Okay, let's see. What's the difference between worshiping through music as opposed to worshiping through reading and praying? Kind of goes back to the lifestyle thing, and that you really can through.
You can through all those things, and I do think that relates back to the lifestyle of worship and the complete surrender that I talked about in the definition that I gave at the beginning. That there's an extreme submission of your life in worship, and that's submitting everything. And certainly God speaks through the Word. God speaks to us through prayer.
Yeah.
God speaks to us through music, and so all of those things, I think it takes all of them.
Yes.
To really be a worship experience, and God can use every single one of them, and we need to be involved in all of those and not just think of music as being the worship tool, but His Word, because the Word is the main way that God speaks to me. Now, occasionally I get an impression, that the Lord is directing me in a certain way, or I hear from Him very clearly, but the Word of God is the way He really speaks to me. So that's definitely an act of worship. Again, surrendering your whole life and not having a compartment, but having Him in every aspect of your life.
I love that. 2 more questions.
Okay.
Do you feel like people hold you to a higher standard in general once you're in a leader position in the church? And if they do you think it's fair that they hold you to a higher position?
I'm sure they do. I know I certainly do think of those in leadership, that they need to be held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
I think all of us should be surrendering our lives to the Lord because of who He is. And I think, but I think with each level, there's people that just attend church on an infrequent basis. There are people who join a church and get involved, and I think more is expected. I think when you walk up on a stage and you take a microphone to do something, I think there's more being given to you, more is being expected. The Lord is giving you more opportunities. And so I think more is expected. And as you become a pastor or a leader or something like that, I think the level continues to be and should be. We're all striving to live a holy lifestyle, or should be. But I think it's just imperative upon leadership because people are looking to them for guidance. And how many times have we heard about tragedies in churches where someone in leadership didn't live up to the standard of holiness that really they should be as a leader, and how it split a church or devastated a church. Yeah. So, and Luke, we were talking about it just a little bit ago, it was Luke 12, 48, that to whom much is given, much is required. So the more you're given responsibility, you've got to steward that responsibility. And I think there is a heavier responsibility to carry with, and should be. People should expect greater things, the more God lays on you to minister.
I agree. So the last question, why do you worship?
Why do I worship? Because that's what I am. That's my DNA. I think God saved us. He saved us to give us an eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful for the covering of my sins, the washing away of my sins and giving me eternal life. But I think God saves us. He's always wanted a relationship with his people. Always.
Yeah. Wow,
throughout
amazing.
the Word. He's always wanted a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saved to turn rebels into worshipers. You know, we have a rebel heart, and when we get saved, we become worshipers, and we have that relationship with him where we talk to him and he talks back to us.
Yeah.
So I think he's longing for that. So why I worship, it's who I am. I'm created to be a worshiper. It's the main thing for me. It's not just a side thing that I do. It's not just a ministry that I do, but it's
not just a job.
It's just in the DNA.
Yes.
To worship the Lord because because of who he is. He's so deserving of praise and worship.
So good. That's so good. It's like you said, it's what we were made for. I've
that.
never felt more alive than in worship.
Right. Absolutely. And when I have seasons where I haven't worshiped as much, especially privately, my whole life is different in that season. And I've gone to pastors several times before and say, I'm dealing with this, or I'm having a hard time with this season. And the first question he'll ever say to me is, how's your worship going?
Really?
It's just like the litmus test. And true, a lot of times when you're in a situation where you don't feel as close to the Lord or something, check your heart, see how your worship's going, your private worship, because it just makes all the difference.
Wow, that is so good.
It does.
That's a great note to end on, too.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
Thank you for this time.
Wow, you tackled all those questions so well.
Thank you for asking me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to remind everyone that Todd will be joining us on April the 23rd, Friday night, April 23rd, in the prayer room. He will be helping us lead worship for a night of worship. So y'all just go ahead and make plans to be here, and we will see you all next week where we will be interviewing another special guest. Thanks so much.